Welcome back to Talking Tokens and another edition of Strata Research, the series where we sit down with our research team to break down one major timely trend across the industry. At the end of June, a company almost nobody has heard of called Open Standard announced a new stablecoin, OUSD, and the crypto world kind of lost its mind for about 48 hours. It had about 140 companies like Visa, MasterCard, BlackRock, Google, Coinbase, all seemingly lined up behind this one token. And not for nothing, Circle stock dropped about 17% following the announcement, as some argued the USDC killer has arrived. And fast forward 2 weeks, Alex took some time to do a deeper read of the announcement, and he came away with a very different read that this isn't just a 140 company coalition at all. But I'm going to let him explain it. He just published the full breakdown, so let's talk about it. Alex, welcome on.
Hey, yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, let's start with the headline claim in your report that OUSD is Stripe's stablecoin and nothing more. Stripe is a name on the list of the 140 companies, but it isn't even the issuer on record. So kind of walk me through how you got to that conclusion.
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of names on the list, and Stripe is just one of them. But if you take a look at the mechanics of the stablecoin itself, it becomes a little more obvious that like Stripe has a bigger hand in this than some of the other names. For example, Bridge, which got acquired by Stripe in February of 2025, will be the company issuing the stablecoin. Obviously, Bridge issues a lot of stablecoins, but just one piece of evidence there. Another is that Privy, which is also another Stripe company, will be running the onboarding, the onboarding and off ramping of the stablecoin. Additionally, Zach Abrams, who was the CEO of Bridge, is also the CEO of Open Standard. So you have another Stripe affiliated executive who's running and managing the company. And then in the announcement that Open Standard made, Stripe's claim was that OpenUSD will be the default stablecoin across Stripe's business, which none of the other companies have made so far. So if you look at the evidence, it does seem to point towards more that Stripe is the one kind of behind the scenes that seems to be more involved, more so than the other people on the list.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so if this is effectively like a Stripe product, why go through the trouble of building a 140 partner board and an independent entity? And like, what does that Consortium wrapper, so to speak, get them that, maybe a Stripe branded coin wouldn't? Because I feel like just calling it Stripe's coin could also go very, very well.
Yeah, it might. There's two possible reasons why they wouldn't want it to be specifically Stripe's coin. The first would be some concerns about concentration. Obviously, Stripe already owns so many parts of the stack, like the crypto stack. So for its own business, it owns Privy, it owns Bridge, it now has its own chain and Tempo. So having its own stablecoin issuer as well might be a little suspicious for people, like looking at Stripe and wondering if maybe there's some sort of concerns about concentration of the business there. Another angle is for competitors or people that are trying to or have competitive payments networks, using a token that's issued by a competitor isn't very attractive, right? You'd rather own the stablecoin yourself or use something that's a neutral third party. So having something that's called Open Standard and it's run by these 140 different companies, it's not controlled by Stripe, it's not controlled by your competitor, makes it a little more attractive for other companies to start using it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an argument we're hearing for a lot of teams is like to have their own stablecoin. And I think Circle's USDC or Tether's USDT would argue against this because obviously they want people to use their stablecoin opposed to issuing their own. So that's kind of like TBD on whether or not like issuing your own stablecoin is like worth the squeeze, in my opinion. But like you said, this is like a trend we're seeing across the board. I also want to talk more about the 140 companies actually on that list because I remember seeing some companies come out and say that they weren't even part of it at all. So can you kind of explain like why was the list so long? And for those companies that are actually a part of it, why did they choose to join and whether or not like it's mostly legit?
Yeah. So you might have seen some of the companies, specifically the Korean companies. So Samsung, K-Bank, and a few other Korean companies were listed as issuing partners or day one partners for OpenUSD, they came out and basically said, we did not agree to this. Either you guys gave us a call, or we said we would think about it, or you told us about it and we had a conversation, but we never actually formally agreed like we would be on the board or involved in this project. And during the announcement, we were included anyways. So I don't think it really matters for OpenUSD in the long run, to be honest, because end of the day, if it is really just Stripe stablecoin, they don't really need all these different people on, help. They don't need such a wide distribution. It obviously helps.
They kind of already have it embedded, right? Like they have the distribution, they have the network effects of everything. So maybe in like some ways, and I would love for you to see whether or not I'm thinking about this the right way, but like, is it that they have all these maybe 140 companies that are already embedded within Stripe's ecosystem in a capacity? So it's almost like, yeah, of course they're going to get the benefit of this Stripe already works with them.
Yeah, that's another angle too. It's like, if anybody that uses Stripe will inherently be using OpenUSD anyways. So it doesn't matter necessarily if they're on the board or not. I think it is, and at the end of the day, the announcement was mostly a marketing play, right? It's an announcement of an announcement, right? OpenUSD is not live yet. It's still in production. It's going to come out later this year. And for the companies that are actually partnered with OpenUSD and have come out and said, like, yes, we are on board. We had the conversation. We're supporting the launch. There's very little downside for them, right? So if you look at Ripple, on the outside, it might seem like there's downside, right? They operate their own stablecoin in RLUSD, and you might think, well, why are they, supporting a competitive stablecoin? In reality, they don't really have to be moving any volume away from their own stablecoin. All they have to say is we support it and we will accept it as payment, right? And allow it on the XRP ledger, right? So not a ton of downside there. It doesn't really impact their business. If Stripe wants to maintain and use their own stablecoin, that's fine. It doesn't really affect us. We can keep using our stablecoin, and we can just accept more flow from OUSD users as well, right? So not a ton of downside for Coinbase as well, and we can get into this a little bit more later. But they have a major deal with Circle. They earn a lot of revenue from USDC. They offer most of the assets that are on Coinbase, are priced in USDC, or like USDC is like the main stablecoin on Coinbase. So by endorsing OpenUSD, first of all, they're giving more assets to their users, which they always want to do. And second of all, they have their renewal deal with Circle coming up. So then they get to come to Circle with this partnership with OpenUSD as a potential competitor later on. So it gives them more leverage in that sense too. So very little downside and potential upside, because being a partner, obviously you get advantage from the share of revenue that's generated from the treasuries that are held by OpenUSD. So
yeah,
upside, very little downside.
Yeah. So USDC, as we know, is issued by Circle, and while it's the primary issuer, Coinbase also played a very big role in its creation, and then, to your point, is a major partner distributor of it. To my knowledge, I think it's like the main, if not only, stablecoin. I would fact check me on that on Coinbase, but I know they definitely do not offer USDT, which is the world's largest stablecoin. So something to be said there. And then also Circle stock, as we mentioned in the intro, is down 17% following the announcement. I just looked this morning. It is down over 20% on the month. So if Coinbase is not leaving USDC and this Consortium OUSD stablecoin is kind of like going to be baked in with Stripe, then why did Circle's stock drop? Like, what were investors actually reacting to? Is there something else going on? And if there would be a rebound, what would it tell you?
Yeah, I think that for Circle's part, this is, while it's not like the worst case scenario, it's still not a good scenario for Circle. Obviously, it's, at the very least, it's more competition, right? It's a new stable coin with wide distribution and a lot of backing that's coming onto the market that's going to take market share away from USDC. And then going back to the arrangement that they have with Coinbase, this is probably, again, not the worst case scenario, but it's really not good, right? Circle gives more than half of the revenue it makes on its reserves to Coinbase. And then Coinbase also gets to keep all of the profits that USDC makes on, Coinbase Exchange, which is a pretty favorable deal for Coinbase. It's probably the best deal for any stablecoin, the worst deal for any stablecoin issuer and the best deal for any partner with a stablecoin that's ever happened in crypto's history. And that deal is up for renewal in August of this year. Coinbase and Circle are going to be coming to the table, negotiating for a new deal. At the worst case, or the best case for Circle, they're going to keep the same deal. I think Coinbase has enough leverage to basically renew the same deal. At the worst case for Circle, Coinbase is now going to be able to come to Circle and say, like, hey, we're going to need even more from this deal because, like, if we don't, then we're going to go forward with OUSD and we're going to implement them into our platform instead. So I think investors are kind of realizing that Circle has a very tenuous position. Large percentage of Circle's entire supply also lives on Coinbase. So the distribution of Circle across the ecosystem is not very large. So Coinbase has a lot of sway in terms of how Circle performs.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. I think the earth would crater if Coinbase stopped offering USDC, though. So I'm not sure if that would be an outcome. But yeah, to your point, I think there's like leverage and, business deals to be done on this. Like, it's not just like very blanketed. I know you also spoke to some people in the industry, and you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but like, what was kind of their feedback? Because these are like, executive CEOs, people who are either stablecoin issuers or work within the sphere. What was their take on all this?
I would say most people are chalking this up to exactly what I was talking about. This is Stripe's coin. And the announcement itself was a little bit of a nothing burger, if I'm being honest. So most issuers are not super intimidated or scared of OpenUSD. They think that the majority of OpenUSD is just going to live on Stripe. It's not going to really impact their business too much. It's definitely not going to impact Tether or USDT. They don't believe that people are really going to be holding this and using this for payments, and that it's mostly going to live on Stripe. And then the other point is that there's nothing really novel about the launch itself. There's other tokens out there like Agora, which is a consortium of different companies. It's State Street and VanEck. The revenue share is not new. USDC has been doing revenue share for forever. And I guess the most novel part of it is the free minting and burning. You don't have to pay fees for minting and burning, but besides that, there's nothing really novel about it. It really is just kind of Stripe's move to own their own stablecoin.
Yeah. Okay, last question, Alex. In the report, you make two definitions for OUSD's success looking forward. OUSD as Stripe's internal settlement rail, and OUSD as a market coin people can hold and trade. Can you kind of break down what those mean and which one you think is more likely? I think I have an opinion, but I want to see if we're aligned.
Yeah, I have a feeling we have the same opinion. But the first path to success would be if Stripe is able to successfully implement OUSD into their business. I think this is probably pretty likely. I think it's in their interest. This would be very good for OpenUSD because obviously they get access to Stripe's distribution. Stripe is a massive business. They have thousands of merchants that they work with. I think having access to Stripe's business would be great for OUSD, and that would be obviously the first path to success and probably the most obvious. The second would be, like I was talking about, OUSD is like a market stablecoin. So think something like USDT, where people, might hold it in their wallets or use it for payments or, integrate into neobanking and things like that. I think this is a little more difficult just because, first of all, that ecosystem already exists. It's very competitive, and it's mainly based off of partnerships, right? You have to either partner with like neobanks or card issuers and convince people to start adopting your stablecoin outside of your own business, which I think is a little more difficult. I think if you're also looking at potential market caps of OUSD moving forward, or the supply of OUSD or where it can reach, I think Paxos is probably a good at least benchmark for where it could get in the future. The USDG token is about a $3 billion token. I think it can at least reach that. I think with Stripe's distribution, it might go beyond that. So this is definitely not going to be a small token by any means. I don't want to paint this as like, really a nothing burger. I think this will actually succeed. But those are my two paths for success. Was that what you were thinking as well, Jackie? Or
It's aligned. It's aligned.
okay.
Okay, I guess, we like to ask our listeners questions. So maybe in the show notes, we can ask them, hey, you think this will be successful or not? Let us know. But yeah, Alex, thank you so much for coming on today. Always a pleasure. And we will have you back on again for the next Analyst Insights.
Yeah, thank you so much. I always have fun doing these, so it's good to be here.
Yes, thank you.